The emergency light choked in blood-red flashes, and in one of them, as if in a bad dream, I watched as my old dented thermos slowly slipped out of my numb fingers. The last sip of long-cooled coffee splashed onto the ribbed floor of the module, instantly mixing with the acrid smell of melting insulation and the deafening screech of the tearing hull. Our own communication system, having gone mad, continued to automatically broadcast the same phrase into the dead airwaves. "This is the Virtus team. Something broke here. Do you hear us? We could use some coffee and duct tape." A calm, almost mundane voice, as if nothing had happened. As if we weren't falling from orbit straight into hell. First came the shaking. Not just turbulence. It felt as if a giant, invisible hand had grabbed our escape module and begun to shake the very soul out of it. Then the floor literally gave way beneath our feet. The gravity compensators howled and died, and we were hurled toward the ceiling. The only thing I managed to grab hold of was the chrome bracket of a handrail, which dug into my palm until it left bloody blisters. At that moment, when my stomach painfully lurched up to my very throat, I realized the full horror of what was happening. Gravity had nothing to do with it. Our hull was simply falling apart as we went. The module was crumbling into pieces while we flew in this insane, uncontrolled tailspin, and the only thing separating us from the cold breath of the vacuum was the thin metal tube of the handrail and the siren wailing on all frequencies. The blinking, jagged red light struck my eyes, searing my retinas. Through this pulsating veil, I saw Akira. Her whitened fingers gripped the adjacent seat in a deathly clutch. Her lips moved rapidly, uttering either curses or prayers, but I couldn't hear a single sound. Everything was swallowed by a low, vibrating hum, and the disgusting shriek of the outer plating melting from atmospheric friction. And amidst all this apocalypse, my brain clung to the absurd. Smoke pulled from the cracks. We were a second away from death, and I thought only about how not to lose sight of that very same fallen thermos. An irrational, insane thought pulsed in my temples. If it is lost for good, it's the end. The last anchor connecting me to a normal, predictable life where things have meaning. Suddenly, Akira screamed. It wasn't words, but a guttural, primal sound that cut through the roar of the dying metal. I saw her throw her entire body weight onto the backup manual control lever. The module lurched violently. We were nearly torn from our saving restraints, and then something resembling silence arrived. More precisely, it wasn't silence, but a sharp, deafening physical relief. The pain squeezing my temples vanished. The module was still shuddering, but this rhythm no longer promised imminent death. I heard the blood pounding frantically in my ears, felt the cold sweat streaming down my spine in rivulets. It was still hell, but now it was a hell where one could take at least a single breath. __quote_, _, Akira exhaled hoarsely. I nodded slowly, not even certain she could discern my movement in this dim half-light. My gaze fixed on the floor. There, in a puddle of dirty coffee mixed with ash, lay my thermos. The speaker above my head wheezed again, spitting out old words. Quote 2, quote 3. Our own space call sign sounded like a mocking epitaph, as if we hadn't crashed, as if we were still up there. I forced my head up, looking through the cracked viewport of the mangled airlock. Someone was out there. He didn't rush about, didn't try to help us, and didn't look even slightly impressed by the fact that we had miraculously survived a fall from orbit. He just stood there, watching us. 3 meters of monolithic, smoky quartz, a smooth, perfect mirror surface where a human face should be, and an ominous, pulsing violet glow deep within that void. There was something in his wordless presence that froze the blood in my veins faster than any open vacuum. I realized it instantly. It was absolute, icy calculation. He watched us with the patience of a being who knew from the very beginning how it would all end. When Akira, breathing heavily, instinctively reached for her holster, the quartz giant tilted his head slightly to the side. In a human, this gesture would mean mild curiosity, but coming from this creature, it looked like a death sentence read aloud. The being stepped aside smoothly, without a single sound, revealing the place where we had crashed. And in that moment, the illusions finally shattered. We hadn't survived. We had fallen into a trap. Struggling to pry open the jammed hatch, I prepared myself to see an inky void or rocky ground. Instead, heavy, stale air hit me in the face. We were in a greenhouse, but this was nothing like the sterile, well-tended laboratory with climate control that I had studied in detail on the station's holographic maps a few days ago. This place had died long ago. Mutated vegetation had aggressively crawled over every surface, strangling the metal bulkheads and pushing through deep cracks in the vaulted ceiling. Greenery was everywhere, but it didn't bring life. It was sickly, rotten, and covered in a strange slime. The damp, springy carpet of decaying leaves beneath our feet emitted such a nauseating stench, as if organic waste had been rotting here for months, generously doused in corrosive acid. "Sensors are clear," Akira muttered, sweeping her portable scanner around the perimeter. With one hand, in a swift, subtle motion, she snatched my discarded thermos from the floor and shoved it into the deep pocket of her jacket, an old habit of leaving no traces behind. "Thermal signals are completely absent." I nodded tensely, but my eyes were already feverishly scouring the space for any threat. Thick, impenetrable shadows loomed all around. Every hanging vine seemed like a lurking predator ready to lunge at our throats. We needed to make our way to the hangar bay immediately. In a straight line, it was no more than 30 meters, but in this jungle, the real distance could easily be doubled. A winding, overgrown path meandered between shattered glass incubators, where, in the station's former life, experimental specimens were once grown. Akira silently took the initiative and went first, holding the scanner at the ready. I followed behind, clutching my data tablet until my knuckles turned white, as if this piece of plastic could protect me from the horror lurking in the shadows. And then I heard it. The sound was quiet, almost imperceptible, as if someone were slowly, with sadistic pleasure, dragging a fingernail across thick glass. We spun around sharply. He was standing right in the center of the dead greenhouse, the same 3 meters of smoky quartz, the same smooth, mirrored void instead of a face. Inside his chest, a cold purple glow pulsed steadily and serenely. Scientist. The creature's voice had no visible source. It didn't emanate from a specific point, but seemed to be born right in the air, enveloping us from all sides. "Your internal database documents indicate that you specialize in xenomorphology." I blinked in confusion, feeling a chill run down my spine. It had been studying our files? "You personally classified 17 new species," continued the voice, woven from vibrations. "3 of them now officially bear your name. A rather ironic fact, considering that you yourself never dared to look into a mirror long enough to understand your own essence." Akira froze mid-step. From behind, I saw the muscles beneath her jacket tighten like a bowstring. "Why are you here?" My voice sounded pathetic and muffled, as if coming from deep underwater. The creature didn't answer immediately. Instead of words, Vega smoothly, without the slightest hint of aggression, raised one of his 4-faceted limbs and slowly drew it through the air. Where the blade sliced through space, the dense wall of rotting vegetation swayed obediently. "Do you even understand why I waited for so long?" he said with an intonation as if you were sharing a cherished secret with us. "Believe me, it wasn't about fear at all. I was simply waiting patiently for the moment when you two would finally stop deluding yourselves that your mission is a rescue operation." My heart painfully skipped a beat, because now, looking at you, I see. You have understood everything. Vega tilted his faceless head slightly again. In this simple movement, there was something frighteningly human, almost. "Whatever you do now, it is already part of my plan. Every one of your pathetic steps, every convulsive breath." I glanced sideways at Akira. She didn't even turn her head toward me. Her pupils were continuously scanning the space around us, evaluating tactical options. "You are very much mistaken." I tried to put at least a drop of confidence into my voice. "Perhaps," Vega agreed with surprising ease. "But just look." He shifted half a step to the side, and his perfectly smooth mirrored surface caught a pale beam from the surviving emergency lamp. In that distorted reflection, I saw us. 2 pathetic, tiny silhouettes against the backdrop of suffocating, rotting greenery. You naively assume that I am a classic hunter, and you, accordingly, are my prey. What a lovely illusion of comfort, isn't it? It soothes your mind. To know that you are weaker, but to have at least an understandable coordinate system. The air around us was becoming heavier, pressing down on our shoulders like a concrete slab. I could physically feel the sticky moisture on my skin, and somewhere deep in my lungs, the foul, Swedish aftertaste of decomposing organic matter began to settle. But what if I reveal the truth to you? Vega continued softly, and his purple core flared a bit brighter. You didn't become prey as a result of the crash. You have been prey since the very beginning of your journey. Akira cursed under her breath, barely audible. Dr. Morgan. The creature's tone became frighteningly tender, chilling to the very bone. Did your vaunted intellect truly allow you to believe that your personal research notes fell into my hands by mere accident? That I was simply wandering through an abandoned station, stumbled upon them, and, out of boredom, became interested? I swallowed nervously, feeling my mouth go dry. You truly possess an extraordinary mind, and that is exactly why you are my most perfect specimen. A dead silence fell. In the next second, Vega simply dissolved into the thick thickets. He didn't run away. He didn't retreat into the shadows. He vanished so swiftly and silently, as if his massive body had never been there at all. The only evidence of his recent presence was a thick liana trembling slightly in the exact spot where he had just been standing. Akira acted faster than I could even process his disappearance. She grabbed my arm with a death grip, her fingers digging painfully into my wrist, leaving bruises. Run. She didn't bother repeating it twice. She didn't waste precious seconds on explanations. She simply bolted, and I, driven by pure survival instinct, threw myself after her. We tore our way through the dead jungle. Tough bushes lashed across my face, leaving bleeding scratches, while thorny branches snagged on my protective gear, trying to hold us back in this rotting trap. The heavy stench of decaying greenery and ammonia hit my nose with such force that it took my breath away. My throat constricted in primal terror. And right behind our backs, a sound was building. It wasn't the heavy footsteps of a predator. Rather, it was a foul, continuous rustling, as if something enormous and heavy was sliding across the wet vegetation with unnatural speed. When we finally broke free from the clutching embrace of the greenhouse, the air quality changed abruptly. It became noticeably colder and drier. I felt it against my heated skin and realized with relief the technical hangar was very close. Akira didn't even think of slowing down, her heavy jacket flapping loudly behind her like a sail in a gale-force wind. I ran right in her footsteps, my lungs burning like fire. But this internal blaze wasn't fueled by physical exhaustion at all. It was concentrated fury. A fine, barely perceptible pollen was settling on my hands. Tiny spores landed like a weightless film, yet I felt them with every nerve cell, like corrosive salt on the tongue after a grueling marathon. This filth was literally everywhere. It worked its way into the pores of my skin, penetrated the fabric of my clothes, and tangled in my hair. And while I raced down the life-saving corridor on autopilot, away from the dead plants, that part of my brain which was responsible for scientific analysis and never switched off, began to feverishly construct a schematic. Biology. This was my territory. I knew biology inside and out. These gray spores belonged to the aggressive Ascomycota class, an exclusively parasitic strain. Under normal conditions, they would instantly colonize any organic matter, but for crystalline life forms, I nearly laughed out loud at the sudden realization. Vega was composed of complex silicates, and silicates are, essentially, dead sand, glass, solid quartz. These parasitic spores could not, under any circumstances, cause him fatal harm. But they could, guaranteed, slow him down. A plan formed in my head in a fraction of a second. The design was brilliant in its simplicity. I had to become the bait and run straight down the corridor. Akira will move to the side, disappearing into the web of ventilation shafts. Vega will follow me specifically. He made it crystal clear himself that he considers me his perfect specimen. And while this self-satisfied hunter is busily pursuing me, I will lure him into an isolated section of the hangar where the shattered incubators stand. It was humid there, incredibly warm, and full of rotting organics. Perfect, greenhouse-like conditions for the explosive growth of spores. They will cover his smooth quartz body in a thick layer. They will clog the articulations, locking the microjoints tight. This process will turn the swift, 3-meter killer into a lumbering, clumsy statue. True scientific beauty in action. My lips stretched into a cruel smirk of their own accord. Akira, I braked sharply right at the hangar entrance and gripped my partner's shoulder firmly. ___, quote __, 8 ___. She cast a quick glance at me. In her dark eyes, for a fraction of a second, flickered that same cold, calculating glint that had saved us so often in the past. She gave a barely perceptible nod. No unnecessary questions. No stupid arguments about who should be the hero. In the next second, she dissolved into the gloom of the side passage. I turned and bolted in the opposite direction, straight into the depths of the vast hangar, weaving between high stacks of rusty containers, rushing past a shuttle stripped for parts. The thick smell of old machine oil and burnt metal hit my nose. Somewhere far below, the main generator hummed steadily and heavily. In a state of extreme adrenaline shock, this hum seemed to me like a deafening roar one moment, and a quiet whisper the next. The sound synchronized strangely with the frantic rhythm of my heart. And then, I heard footsteps behind my back, though it was hard to call them footsteps, more like a rhythmic, bone-chilling scraping. Hard crystal was scratching the steel plating of the floor. He was methodically following me. My pulse hammered against my eardrums like a war drum. Icy sweat ran in streams down my back under the suit. The spores settled on my skin began to itch unbearably, as if thousands of red-hot needles had been driven under my epidermis. But I forbade myself to scratch. I had no right to lose concentration for even a millisecond. Behind my back, his specific breathing could be heard. A soft, whistling hiss of air passing through the complex crystalline structures of his body. He was rapidly closing the distance. Excellent. My trap was directly ahead. In the dim light, the broken incubators appeared. Huge glass tanks where the station staff once lovingly cultivated biomaterial. Now they were filled to the brim with black, bubbling organics. The stench was such that my stomach did a somersault, but with a monstrous effort of will, I suppressed the gag reflex. The environment was perfect. It was time. I demonstratively slowed my pace. I played the role of the cornered, exhausted victim. Breathing heavily, I turned around, and our eyes met. Vega froze 10 meters away from me. The faceless mirror surface of his head caught the flashes of the red emergency lights. And in that distorted crystal mirror, I saw myself, pathetic, smeared with caustic spores, with pupils dilated from primal terror. The creature slowly, mockingly, tilted its head. Underscore, quote underscore 9 underscore, he rumbled. He was using human speech. Throughout my entire conscious life, I have dedicated myself to studying dangerous creatures on the fringes of explored space, and I knew one ironclad rule. Not a single animal, not even the most highly developed one, wastes time on conversation before a lethal strike. They obey instincts. They simply attack. Vega was no animal. I backed away. The gray spores on my hands phosphoresced eerily in the prevailing gloom. Underscore, quote underscore 10 underscore. Vega's voice became unnaturally soft, almost lulling. Quote 11. He took another fluid step forward. Quote 12. And with that, it all ended. Suddenly, with the grace of a perfect killing machine, he spun around on the spot. His long, segmented tail sliced through the air with a low hum, shifting his balance, and Vega surged rapidly to the side. Not toward me, toward the dark rectangles of the ventilation shafts, toward where Akira had gone. At that moment, something deep inside me broke with a deafening crack. A terrifying screech of mangled metal rang out, the sound of a heavy fall, a short cry, choked with pain, and then an absolute ringing silence fell. I remained standing in the middle of the damp hangar, as if rooted to the floor. My legs refused to obey. The spores on my skin suddenly felt like coarse sandpaper, stripping the flesh down to the bone. A violent shudder racked my body. I had made a fatal mistake. Vega didn't think in biological algorithms at all. Psychology was his element. From the very beginning, this creature knew that in a critical situation, I would try to draw the threat onto myself, while Akira would try to escape. He knew that my scientist's brain would inevitably construct a trap, and with mathematical precision, he calculated exactly where I would try to spring it, because he had already dissected my way of thinking. I was wrong, and the price of that mistake was Akira's life. I had sent her right into the predator's maw. No complex theories or scientific terms remained in my head. Only one primitive word pulsed in my brain: fear. It wasn't some beautiful literary metaphor. It was a paralyzing, animal terror. Out of the thick shadows near a mangled ventilation grate, Vega emerged silently. His blade-like tail swayed smoothly from side to side. It was the only detail I could perceive clearly now. Everything else drowned in a murky peripheral blur caused by a severe adrenaline crisis. On the sharp, glistening edges of his limbs, something dark was visible. Fresh blood. Behind him, by the warped metal wall, lay Akira. I couldn't make out her face, only an unnaturally twisted silhouette. Suddenly, the silhouette moved faintly, almost imperceptibly. She was still alive. The crystalline killer stared at me without looking away, and in that featureless, mirrored abyss, there wasn't a single grain of cheap triumph. There was no gloating mockery of a victor, only bare, cold calculation. "Now, you are no longer a scientist," he stated in a soulless tone. Vega's tail sliced through the damp air with a whistle, and his faceplate caught the glints of the emergency lighting once again. I looked straight into that mirror. The reflection showed my own trembling hands, covered in the deathly white coating of spreading spores. The creature took its first leisurely step toward me, slowly, nonchalantly, as if all the time in this cursed universe now belonged to him alone. And, staring into that void, I finally understood. Vega was absolutely right. Science no longer worked here. Dr. Morgan died back there, by the ventilation shaft. I was becoming someone entirely different. The lethal tail continued its hypnotic balancing act in space. The mangled Akira froze and showed no further signs of life. The parasitic spores on my skin began to blacken rapidly. Maybe it was just the distorted light playing tricks. I didn't know. I couldn't think logically at all anymore. My gaze was deathly fixed on the predator's mirrored face, which reflected my own irreversible transformation with flawless precision. Vega slightly tilted his featureless head, and for a microsecond, he froze. In that tiny pause, in that glitch of his perfect rhythm, I suddenly saw everything. I recognized the pattern. The crystalline hunter wasn't invulnerable. He simply functioned according to a different physics. The way he moved, his quartz body didn't just change shape. It instantly reacted to any physical resistance, adjusting its density to match the obstacle. He never bypassed traps. With sadistic persistence, he smashed right through them. But then I noticed something else, something my biologist's brain had missed due to the panic: the light. Flashes of emergency lamps reflected in his sharp edges, refracted through the murky thickness of smoky quartz, and cast bizarre, iridescent shadows onto the hangar's rusty walls. And right there, where the focused light passed through his internal structures, the armor plates trembled ever so slightly. It wasn't a reaction to an impact. It was resonance, a frequency that caused him discomfort. He was vulnerable to a specific spectrum. I didn't have time to finish the thought. Vega lunged forward abruptly, and his tail described a wide, whistling arc, calculated precisely to take my head off. By some miracle, I managed to jump back, dropping the useless tablet, and slammed my shoulder into the nearest stack with all my might. Heavy metal crates tore free from their mountings and rained down on him like an avalanche. He didn't even slow down. He walked right through them. He crumpled the thick metal with his torso, flattened the corners, and restored his crystal form in half a second. Without hesitation, without emotion, I rushed to Akira. She was unbearably heavy. Her limp body, hanging over my shoulder, became a dead weight that pulled me toward the ground, but one I couldn't abandon. Every step echoed with a cutting pain in my lower back. Every breath turned into a bloody wheeze. But I stubbornly dragged her toward the far airlock, while the crates behind my back shattered with a roar. Grabbing a heavy plasma cutter along the way, I hurled it straight into the narrow passage. A fountain of sparks, acrid smoke, the deafening clang of metal. Vega passed through the active tool, like a knife through water, grinding it into dust. Reaching the vestibule, I slammed my hand against the panel. The thick pressure door crashed down, cutting us off from the hangar. But before the lock could click into place, a sickening screech rang out. Vega was pushing against the slab with superhuman strength, altering his body's molecular density and squeezing through the narrowing gap. The door held. 5 seconds, maybe 10. That had to be enough. I dragged Akira further. She was wheezing on my shoulder, and her hot, real blood dripped onto my neck, a terrifying contrast to the cold breath of death at my back. The pressure door let out a long groan, cracked at the seams, and shattered into pieces. Vega didn't bypass the obstacle. He broke it again. I realized this by his colossal shadow, which fell predatorily onto the wall next to me. 3 meters of quartz, playing with the reflections of the emergency lamps, and the plates on his body were trembling more and more. He was continuously adapting. While I was frantically building barriers, his algorithms were studying them and breaking them down. My original plan had finally crumbled to dust. In desperation, I dropped Akira by the wall, ripped a heavy power cable reel from its mount, and hurled it at Vega, just to buy 1 extra second. Useless. The reel bounced off him, as if hitting a concrete bunker. The creature smoothly tilted its head. In the mirror of his face, I saw my pathetic reflection again, covered in gray filth, with an idiotic portable welding torch dangling from my belt. And at that moment, my eyes fell on the ceiling, a ruptured main pipe. The emergency valve finally kicked in, and water poured from above with a deafening roar. Ice-cold, technical water, instantly flooding the ribbed floor of the corridor. Splashes soaked my boots. Vega confidently stepped into the streams of water, and suddenly froze in his tracks. His monolithic plates shuddered convulsively. The light from the flashing lamps passed through the thick water curtain, chaotically refracting and hitting his body. Wild, irregular rainbow glares danced on the walls. The predator's perfect mirror-like face darkened sharply. He went blind. His crystalline sensory apparatus was not designed for such a sudden, chaotic change in the refractive index. The water bent the photons, and Vega lost his focus. His movements instantly lost their lethal grace and became uncertain, jerky. His sharp tail lashed convulsively in the air, groping for lost landmarks. I grabbed Akira under her arms and lunged forward. Her weight, her ragged breath against my temple, the squelching of water in my boots. And behind us, a new sound erupted. Not a growl, a furious hiss, as if that icy water were leaving acid burns on his quartz skin. I understood perfectly well that the water wouldn't kill him. It only threw off his optical settings, distorted his perception of space, and forced his system to adapt anew. But it gave us priceless time. We tumbled into the adjacent hangar block. The doors closed heavily behind us, cutting off the sound of the pouring water. A gruesome puddle remained trailing on the metal floor, our blood mixed with technical grime. Akira suddenly opened her eyes, dark, focused, sharp as a scalpel. She stared at me without blinking. Alive. A single thought throbbed in my temples. Alive. And somewhere behind the wall, Vega was already recovering. His faceted eyes, or whatever replaced his vision, were slowly adjusting to the new conditions. I looked down at my hands. The parasitic spores were rapidly turning black. They were aggressively spreading through my veins. Something inside my body was going catastrophically wrong. I dragged Akira across the metal, tripping over a guide rail. Her battered face brushed against the dirty floor, but she didn't even flinch. She only let out a short, angry exhale through clenched teeth. I leaned her against a massive stack of crates, back to the wall, legs extended. She breathed frequently but steadily. A dry click sounded in my earpiece. Quote _ 16 __. I replied with just my lips. She read my face anyway. Akira closed her eyes, concentrating. Quote 17. Her voice came through the comms, quiet but crystal clear. No panic, professional steel. Quote 18. Quote 19. I nodded, unhooking the welding tool from my belt. My fingers turned white from the tension. Quote 20. Quote, I whispered. Akira opened her eyes and simply looked at me with her signature, bone-chilling gaze. And then she gave a barely perceptible jerk of her chin toward the entrance. Vega entered the hangar. 3 meters of lethal quartz. Sparks from short-circuiting wiring showered from the ceiling, and his mirrored face caught these flashes, scattering them in a blinding fan. He moved frighteningly slowly, carefully. His tail was extended forward like a radar antenna. He was listening to the void. I pressed myself into the crates. My heart was pounding somewhere in my throat. The predator froze in the very center of the room. The silence between us instantly thickened, becoming palpable and sticky, like blood, like that foul, cold air that always pools near the floor in morgues. A heavy drop of condensate broke free from the ceiling. The impact against the metal sounded like a cannon shot. I flinched instinctively. Vega snapped his head sharply. He localized the sound and moved directly toward it. Quote 21 flashed through my mind. Quote 22. He was heading further left, past a heap of tangled wires. His tail glided through the air, feeling for obstacles. Blinded by refraction and scattered light, he had switched entirely to echolocation. He heard every drop, every creak of metal under the building's weight, the monotonous hum of the generator, and I suddenly realized, I can control him. Akira, I exhaled into the microphone. He's to my left, heading toward the power cables. I see him, she responded immediately. Turn right. Behind the generator, there's a stack of towing cables. Lead him there. I crawled on all fours. The icy metal burned my palms through my gloves. I read the geometry of the space with my body. My right elbow brushed a crate. My left knee slid over a cable. My boot sank into a puddle. My nervous system had turned into an exposed antenna. To the left, the main generator, the station's second heart, pulsed powerfully in a low register. This vibration resonated in my bones, reliably masking my rustling. Vega moved forward methodically. A dull thud. He struck an obstacle. He froze, analyzed the reflected sound, and bypassed the crate. His algorithms were optimizing again. His movements were becoming increasingly confident. Quote 27, quote, I whispered. Quote 28, quote, the cold voice said in my ear. Quote 29, quote. I slid to the right. Vega stood motionless. For a second, the mirrored plate reflected my hunched figure, but he was looking toward where I no longer was. And suddenly, he froze. Completely. Absolute stasis. His tail stopped a millimeter from the floor. I saw a fine, unnatural ripple run across his quartz plates. He understood. His perfect processor had finally put two and two together. He realized that I was artificially creating an acoustic trail, that he was being led to the slaughter. The silence had changed. From a thick stillness, it had transformed into a ringing, vacuum-like void. Vega's faceplate was aimed into the emptiness, but he was no longer searching for my footsteps. He was listening to the very absence of sound. He was looking for an anomaly. I stopped breathing. My heart hammered with such monstrous force that it felt as if it were breaking my ribs. Every beat was like a drum in an empty hall. The predator was searching for a biological rhythm, a breath, a pulse. The shuttle, Akira whispered, barely audible. The engine, the emergency release switch. I cautiously lifted my head. The wrecked escape shuttle loomed at the far end of the hangar. The outer plating had been torn away, but the cylinder of the plasma engine itself remained intact. A thick armored cable stretched from it to a heavy wall-mounted switch. I understood perfectly what would happen. Vega, slowly, like a turret, turned his head from side to side. His logic had faltered. He knew the prey was nearby, but he couldn't lock onto it. And then, he was just 2 meters away from the switch. The creature turned toward the shuttle, catching the residual thermal radiation and the micro-vibrations of the reactor. He sensed that the trap was somewhere here. I took one last, desperate step toward the control panel. My boot gave a treacherous creak. Vega spun around with lightning speed, and for the first time, I looked into his eyes. Behind the smooth, smoky quartz, 2 points of deep violet light flared up. In that glow, there was no longer any arrogant calculation or icy superiority. There was fear. For the first time in its life, the killing machine was afraid. My finger rested on the cold metal of the starter lever. Akira held her breath in my earpiece. If I pull the lever down, a chain reaction will tear the shuttle's engine apart. In a fraction of a second, the 3-meter-tall crystalline god would turn into a cloud of radioactive dust and shrapnel. It would be an instantaneous death, sterile, efficient. Vega would have killed me exactly like that, without a single hesitation. I looked down at my left hand. The parasitic spores had eaten into the flesh, turning black like grave ash. They were changing my biology. Vega watched me, and in those violet eyes I read anticipation. He had calculated the outcome. He knew that I could grind him into powder with a single movement of my finger. He didn't attack. He didn't try to flee. He just stood there, waiting for his execution. And then the realization hit me. If I press this button, hiding behind technology, I will finally become him, a cold-blooded executioner, a soulless predator for whom a living being is merely an obstacle to be disposed of. I looked at the switch, at Vega, frozen in terror. Science ended here. Survival began. I ripped the welding tool from my belt. A blindingly white plasma beam roared through the gloom of the hangar, and Vega screamed. It wasn't a cry of physical pain. It was a sound that broke all laws of physics, a piercing, glassy screech that made the capillaries in my eyes burst. The perfect body shuddered, its monolithic plates rippling wildly. Fear turned into agony. I stepped forward, gripping the humming cutter. The white-hot plasma bit into his armor. Where the beam touched the quartz, a web of deep cracks spread with a dry snapping sound. For the first time in long decades of the perfect hunt, this thing felt primal pain. Quote, _32, __. Akira's voice broke through the static like a breath of oxygen. I didn't answer. I looked the monster in the eyes. Vega let out a new, distorted scream that echoed repeatedly off the iron vaults. There was a plea in that howl. He was bargaining. He was admitting defeat. I did not back down. I stood and watched as his majesty crumbled, as the purple light inside his chest thrashed in panic, fading under the strikes of plasma. And then I simply turned off the cutter. Vega collapsed, heavily, with the deafening roar of falling stones. 3 meters of smoky quartz, which had struck terror into entire sectors, turned into a pathetic pile of cracked mineral. The mirrored surface grew dull. It no longer reflected the light. It greedily absorbed it. Black cracks crawled across his broken body like dead roots. He was alive. Barely. I saw how weakly his mangled plates rose, how convulsively the purple core flickered. A ringing silence hung in the hangar. Only the low hum of the cooling welder in my hand remained. The thick smell of ozone filled my lungs. There was a persistent, metallic taste of blood in my mouth. The defeated predator lay at my feet. But I felt no intoxicating triumph, only an all-consuming, leaden fatigue that ate away at my soul. Akira appeared silently from the darkness. She stepped cautiously, as if afraid to shatter the fragile balance of this moment. Her face was deathly pale, and the fresh blood on her cheek had crusted into a dark scab. But her gaze was clear. She was walking toward me, and right now, in the entire fucking universe, only that made any sense. My fingers unclenched. The welding machine hit the concrete with a clang. My knees buckled, and I sank heavily onto the dirty floor, right into a puddle of oil and ash. The world around me stopped spinning. All that remained was a cold that chilled me to the bone. Akira knelt beside me. Quote 33. Her voice sounded unusually soft. I raised my eyes to her, at her scratched, insanely tired but so very alive face. Quote 34. I answered honestly. She didn't start talking nonsense about how everything would be fine. She simply nodded in silence. And in that nod, there was more understanding than in 1,000 words. We sat on the frozen floor. Nearby, the broken Vega wheezed. His cracks had already begun to fuse slowly, on a microscopic level. But I knew he was out of the game for a long time. We have to leave, Akira finally broke the silence. I nodded but remained in place. I raised my hands. The soot-black spores had already reached my elbows. Slowly, inevitably, they were changing me. Akira followed my gaze. She held her eyes on the black infection for literally a second and calmly looked away. No questions. No panic. In her silent acceptance, I suddenly found absolute peace. The silence was shattered by the crackle of a speaker above the surviving airtight door. A voice broke through the static. My own voice from the past. "This is the Virtus crew. Do you hear us? We could use some coffee and duct tape." Akira flinched. A flash of surprise crossed her dark eyes. "That's us," she whispered. I nodded. There was no fear. It was just an echo. A signal from orbit, trapped in a time loop. A reminder of who we were before we plummeted into this hell. Akira was the first to stand. She reached out her hand to me. I saw how her blood-stained fingers trembled, how a blue vein pulsed on her wrist. Her hand was warm and firm. I grabbed onto it and stood up. 2 human survivors loomed over the defeated crystalline god, and from the speaker, our own voice continued to absurdly ask for coffee. And then, Akira did something completely insane. She unzipped her jacket, reached into an inner pocket, and pulled out my dented thermos. That very one. It gave a dull clink against the metal of her armor. I stared at that piece of aluminum like it was an artifact from another universe. The coffee had spilled onto the module floor long ago. The thermos was empty, but Akira, with a solemn look, unscrewed the cap and demonstratively sniffed the rim. "Empty," she stated. There was no despair in her eyes, only defiance. thrown right into the face of this rotting station, this broken monster, this black blight upon my hands. She handed it to me. I took the thermos. The cold metal stung my palm. I brought it to my lips and took a deep swallow. Only the phantom taste of old welding and ash settled on my tongue. But at that moment, that emptiness felt like the most right drink of my life. Akira watched me expectantly. She was waiting for a joke, one of those idiotic, misplaced jokes I always used to mask my fear. But I didn't joke. I just looked into her tired eyes, at her trembling lips. Words were no longer needed. I lowered the thermos. "It's still good," I said hoarsely, nodding at the empty piece of iron. "Even cold." Akira blinked, and then a laugh escaped from her chest. A quiet, broken, almost hysterical laugh that she tried to hide in her palms. It was so sincere and real that it made my throat tighten. I handed the thermos back to her. She took it, and our fingers brushed for a second. Dry skin against dry skin, a sparking discharge of life. Behind our backs, Vega let out a low, guttural groan, as if from beneath a thick layer of water. He was broken, he was regenerating, he still posed a threat, but right now, he didn't matter at all. Akira took a symbolic sip of the void and leaned her shoulder tiredly against mine. Her warmth seeped through the protective fabric. The radio chirped weakly again. __quote _ 41 __. We didn't even turn our heads. We just stood in the middle of the ruined hangar, breathing in the smell of burning. The thermos was empty. There was no coffee, no duct tape either. But in this ringing, no longer terrifying silence, we found the only thing worth going through this hell for. We found each other.